Okay, great. Thanks so much for having us today. Again, like Corey said, my name is Scarlett White. I'm a Director of Development and Diversity Initiatives for CBS News. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. It is my pleasure to introduce my esteemed colleague who has had a very impressive career spanning nearly 2 decades at CBS News. She started out as a production assistant at 48 Hours, rose through the ranks from working on the overnight desk to being on the foreign desk, a weekend news manager to news path senior producer to managing editor for the DC Bureau, and now deputy bureau chief of the DC Bureau. I think I did it in the right order, Lorna. And so it is a pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend who is a wealth of knowledge. And thank you all for hosting us tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Scarlett. It is a pleasure to be here. I always love connecting with NABJ and just happy to speak with fellow journalists of color. Look, I know it is a long road for a lot of us. I do feel like where we are in this day and age that things are starting to take a turn, and a turn in a positive direction, just in terms of diversity and bringing more voices and more people to the table. And that has always been my goal and will continue to be my goal and my ambition to bring more folks that look like us, a lot more folks that don't look like us, to who normally don't have that voice to speak up and speak out about issues and stories that we would like to cover that are of importance to our communities, more and more to the table. And so, as Scarlett mentioned, I've been a CBSer going on 20 years. And it's surprising because I know a lot of folks don't tend to stay at a place for so long, but I started in New York, which is a whole different ballgame from here in DC. It certainly is just different cultures, I will say, and having to get acclimated to DC and the pace of DC, which is much slower, but certainly unique in its own sense, of course, with politics, and getting acclimated to the climate here, which I love it. I do love DC. I never thought that I would leave New York, but here I am. And you can only imagine. I mean, I think when I first started here in DC, which was in 2015, the Pope was visiting in September. And from there, everything just has been insanely busy. Of course, we ended up with the Trump administration, which gave us a lot of news, kept us very busy. And even in this transition now, we've been insane in trying to figure out the rhythm of this administration. And it's been good. I mean, I think that where we are right now as a country, certainly with all of last year alone, between the pandemic, between civil unrest, I think that when I say we're turning a corner, that I would even say the coverage that we have certainly been putting on air has changed dramatically. And the voices that we've been putting in the forefront have been much more different, right? And I think that we're at a point where you have a lot more people of color who are speaking out and feel much more comfortable speaking out, right? And so what do you do with that? And where do we go with that? And so I do feel like as we evolve in terms of how we start covering these stories, that we'll be seeing a lot more of that. Certainly today, I can speak to just with evening news, and we have Maria Villarreal, who's on the border, and she's covering the unaccompanied minors on the border and giving voice to the children that are coming across. Just a lot of these stories that we're starting to give more diversity to, we're starting to, which I feel good about. I mean, I think it's great. I think it's a nice turn in a different direction. that I hope we can continue that momentum. But that's where we are right now. I've been in this position probably for the last 6 months, and prior to that with managing editor about a year. And so things have been, like I said, it's been very hectic, but I do feel like it's been fulfilling. And a lot of that does come from the pieces that we've been doing and the direction that we've sort of been going with that. And that's where I want to start with today. So if anybody has questions, I'm here.
Great. Thank you so much. So guys, if you have questions, feel free to you're free to ask or to type those questions in the chat box. So I'll just start off. Ms. Jones, you started your journalism career at 48 Hours as a production secretary. Looking back, did you see yourself, in a leadership role like this at CBS News?
I didn't. I think for me, when I started at 48 Hours, I always wanted to do investigative journalism, and I loved it for some time. I didn't know where I wanted to be. I just knew that I wanted to do news, and what was that going to look like? And when I started at 48, I started getting a sense that I didn't want to do long form anymore, because long form takes time. I wanted something a little bit more faster paced. And so I started actually taking like on the weekends, even during my normal shift during 48 Hours, I would start working on the weekends, like take a day or two sometimes to work down on the assignment desk in New York, which for me was like a whole different ballgame. I mean, it was like you had to think quick on your feet, know who to call when there was breaking news, and also be able to multitask, because not only are you making the calls, you're also trying to figure out where you're going to be able to launch a crew. Where are the producers? Where do they need to go? You have to start scouting locations and what's a good place if, say there's a mass shooting that broke out. Where's the media, where are they set up in terms of being able to get that information? And so for me, that was exciting. And I felt like I had been at 48 probably about 2.5 years, and I wanted to start making that transition into hard news. And I eventually did. So I started working on the desk, and I loved working on the assignment desk. I think sometimes the assignment desk may get a bad rap, but I always tell folks that's a good place to start to lay a foundation, because that's where you learn how to do the who, what, when, where, and why. And you have to learn really fast, right? And so that's also, I find it to be the nucleus of all the broadcasts. Like that's where people go to get their information. That's where people want to know, okay, we just heard about this shooting. How many people are dead or injured? And there's something about sort of owning that and having that information that people are coming to you. You want to be the go-to person.
Thank you.
Sorry. And so it's all of that in terms of, for me, that's where I knew I wanted to be. And then growing from there, like what was going to be my next jump point from there. And then I will say the beauty of where I was at CBS, I got a chance to also work on the foreign desk, which I love. And I certainly was there when we were, during the Iraq War, and being able to speak with correspondents and what their needs were in terms of being able to feed them editorial, making sure that they had all of the video that they needed for their pieces. There's something to folks calling the desk and asking for, hey, did you see, what's the best video that you saw? And that's the video that you picked that is now, starting the package that they have to write to. So with the desk, you are a producer. You're getting all the elements and giving it to the producers or the correspondents. They just have to put everything together. You've pretty much done all the work, right? So I try to get people to think about it in that sense. When they really want to start out in news, try the desk. It's for me, I always felt like you can take those skills anywhere, because you have to learn how to, like I said, in terms of editorial, the fact checking, understanding, what's the best video, and certainly knowing what elements are going to go into a package. You also have to learn how to deal with a whole lot of personalities. And you know, in this business, you got a whole lot of colorful personalities. And you got a slew of folks that are calling from correspondents to producers to sometimes the anchors, right? And executives that call all the time. So you got to know how to manage that as well. So you're dealing with all of these moving parts. You can't help but know that that's going to set you up for success down the line. And so for me, I stayed on the desk for quite some time, would oscillate between the international desk and the domestic desk. I love both. And then from there, just tried to figure out what my trajectory was going to be. I didn't really have a path carved out for me, funny enough. It was just kind of like, okay, let's see what else is opening up. For me, it was just about the hustle and knowing that something else was coming down the line. I just didn't know what it was. And also it's, you know, when the weekend news manager position came up, I raised my hand for it. And it's funny when I think about it, because I think, as I can speak for myself and for most people of color, when you are growing up, you're always taught to put your head down, do your work, and eventually somebody will notice you. Well, you know, now that I'm older, that's not necessarily the case. And people don't notice you until you open your mouth. And that's one thing that I had to learn to do differently, and to do it in a sense that I don't want to come across like I'm bragging, but at the same time, you have to be able to sort of sell yourself or promote yourself in order for people to see you. And how do they do that outside of just seeing your work? And so that for me started to shift. And once the weekend news manager position opened up, I raised my hand for it. And they were like, we weren't even thinking about you. But oh yeah, that'd be great. And I was like, okay. So I kind of fell into that. And from there, it just kind of, you know, went on and on down the line. So, you know, I always encourage folks as much as possible, wherever you are, to just get the most out of that position until it's time for you to move on. And you'll know when it's time to move on, when you've exhausted everything you possibly can out of that position.
And speaking about moving on, what advice do you have for young journalists of color who would like to take on leadership, editorial leadership roles in their newsrooms?
I will say certainly, you look early on, be confident in the stories that you're pitching, which is key. Because a lot of times I know for myself, I can get into my head too much, where it's like, I don't want to be the one that's pitching all the Black stories. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, nobody else is pitching the Black stories, right? And so you know what's going to be newsworthy, and certainly know the difference between what's going to make it on air and what's going to be something that's written in print, because that makes all the difference as well, right? And when you are sort of thinking about, in terms of leadership, know who you are. Don't be afraid of who you are, and be okay with who you are, because that's how you can be able to excel in this business. And I say that because when I started out at 48 Hours, and I was wearing my hair natural, and I will tell you what's interesting, I got more pushback from other Black folks about my hair. And I knew it was I knew the reasons why, but I knew for me that there was no other way that I could be able to be myself other than to wear my hair and rock my hair in the way that, you know, God intended for it to grow outside of my head, right? And so I say that to say, be true to yourself, be professional, and I know we all are, we have to be, but be comfortable in your own skin, because it does matter, and other people will see that. Other people of color will see that and will gravitate towards that as well. And that also helps other folks of color who are in the newsroom who may see that and may be feeling insecure about being where they are. I think that that helps tremendously, is just know thyself and being comfortable with that.
Good response. We have a question from Renee Turner. What are your responsibilities as Deputy DC Bureau Chief, and what jobs are available or currently available? Yeah.
So I wear many hats as Deputy Bureau Chief. A lot of it is dealing with just in terms of logistics, moving teams, crews, correspondents, producers, whenever there's breaking news, certainly covering all of the pool coverage that you'll see, especially out of DC. So all things pool in terms of White House, the Hill, State Department. We're dealing with a really big, with the Secretary of State who's traveling now. We have one of our correspondents on that trip. So making sure that all of the networks are getting that footage, but a lot of the administrative stuff as well. You know, some of the not so fun stuff and dealing with some of that, but it's all part of the job. But this job is fun and it's crazy. It's crazy busy, but it is a fun job, and we have just a good team all around. It's a great bureau to work out of. As far as positions open now, we don't have a whole heck of a lot open that I can think of. In Scarlett, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's a supervising producer position, which is an overnight position on the morning show. And anything else I don't know if there's anything else out of DC other than that.
No,
I can think of.
And the other thing, of course, full disclosure, because we've been acquired by Viacom, they are very, very much involved in the recruitment process.
Yeah.
They have their hand in it very, very, very heavy. So yeah, I know some people get discouraged, you know, applying to stuff because it's like, oh, I'm just applying to some black hole on the internet. And it can feel like that. I think that we're also still trying to figure out that relationship and what that looks like in terms of recruitment, because they are very much involved now. But at the moment, like Lorna said, the only thing that we have is the overnight supervising producer position. I want to say it's like from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. And that's for CBS this morning. I mean, it's a very visible job because it's a management position at a national news network, you know, but we've all worked overnights, or some of us have worked overnights. I know I have, and it can be a grind, but yeah, that's the only thing that we have open at the moment. And hopefully as we transition back to work late summer, early fall, that things will start to move. But that is unfortunately where we are at the moment with just that one position.
And I just posted a link of the opening in the Zoom chat. So you guys can just click on the link. And, oh, sorry, no, I didn't share it with everyone. Give me a second. Yeah. Great. And Eva McKind, we have a question from you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for doing this tonight. I'm wondering, what is the process for getting on the radar of the NewsPath team? And do you need an agent for that? Or, you know, how do you make yourself sort of in the running or in the mix for those positions? I know that that is a great entryway into CBS and some of the NewsPath reporters I've seen do great work on the Hill. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the role and what it entails.
At NewsPath?
Yes.
Sure. So yeah, NewsPath, I love that job. It was very fulfilling in the sense that I don't think people quite understand what NewsPath does. It has a lot of hats, and that's our affiliate services where we have a couple of correspondents who report out of New York, out of DC, out of California, but certainly out of DC. They are sort of the main correspondents for a lot of affiliates out of DC. So they'll handle all things White House and in the Hill. But that is NewsPath is the gateway to the network for people who are on air. And it's really, when you come to NewsPath, you should be ready to go in terms of network, because there are times, and I can speak to it now, where we use NewsPath correspondents sometimes to step in for the network. If, say, a correspondent is out of town or just not available, we will pluck a NewsPath correspondent to help fill in. And that's where, you can, that's a good opportunity for people to notice you and see you. I mean, even being at NewsPath is also a good opportunity for folks to see you, because you have all the affiliates. We have over 200 affiliates where you are on, probably, I would say, more homes. You're probably seeing more homes through the affiliates than you are on, say, an evening news or the morning show. And so I think in terms of getting to NewsPath, usually the agents will reach out to our talent, our VP of talent, Lori Orlando. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she oversees talent. She's actually senior vice president, excuse me. But she certainly oversees our talent and has been placing people through NewsPath as well. So that could be a good connection for you if that's where you're thinking about down the line.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do we have any more questions?
I have a question.
Who is that?
This is
Julie.
Juliet. Hi, Lorna. Thank you for your
Hi.
time. And Scarlett, thank you for coming out tonight. My question is, now that, Lorna, you've been almost a year into your role, and looking back into 2020 and a lot of the racial reckoning, not only in society, but in newsrooms, what structures would you say are in place, in the newsroom now, especially as Gen Z is getting ready to enter the workforce, and accommodating multi-generational reporters who have seen all kinds of things, including discrimination. What structures do you believe are in place now, and which ones would you like to build?
Well, look, we're starting to implement more mentorship programs, which I think are extremely helpful. So you don't, look, I will say in years past, a lot of times what ends up happening is you'll get, a young journalist of color who may be one of the only ones in the newsroom. And yeah, you get the job, but then what do you do beyond that? How do you interact beyond that? And a lot of times folks have been left to fend for themselves. And it's either a sink or swim mode. And that's no way to really go about and help your career to flourish. And I think that we've been able to recognize that, and we have for some time. It's just a matter of getting the wheels in motion to be able to help nurture a lot of younger journalists coming up and helping them to get on that right path, whichever direction they want to go. Some want to be on air, some who want to produce, some who want to write. So we try to place folks with, an unconventional fit, right? It doesn't always have to be another person of color. And sometimes it's placing, a young Black female journalist with the older white correspondent who can certainly teach them the ropes. I've been there for X amount of years. What works for you? How did you be able to become successful in your career? So I think we also have to look at it from a different lens in terms of always pairing the Black person up with the other Black person, or someone who looks like you. Sometimes you got to shake things up a little bit. And I feel like that's sort of the direction that we're going. So that's one thing. And a lot of it too is also career development. Having the trainings and the classes to help people to learn how to shoot, learn how to edit, learn how to write, and what makes a story a story. And some of that too, I know that I try to take young folks under my wing I also try to focus on mid-level people, right? Because I know a lot of times we tend to focus on the younger people that are there, but what about the ones who are sort of in between, who've been there for some time and don't know which direction they want to go in? They need guidance as well. And so in helping them to sort of flesh that out as far as to what their next move is going to be, is it management? Or do you want to try a different beat? Or do you want to go on a different show? And sometimes I try to stress that we have to make sure that we're looking out for everybody. And even the ones that are on the top that are looking for a different move, you know, tired of being in leadership. I think I may want to try something else new. Well, what do you want to do? So it's having those conversations and connecting with people as much as possible. And some of that is through mentorship. And like I said, some of it is going to be through classes. But even as a leader in the Bureau, it's also just talking to people and getting a sense of what their next move is going to be. What are your goals? Do you have any goals set? And if you don't, why not? Because everybody needs to have a goal, right? At least one that you need to be working towards. And it doesn't have to be something big. It could be something, you know, as small as, I think I want to start writing for .com. How do I do that? I've never done that before, but I love to write. You know, it's things like that to be able to nurture that and help people, shepherd people along the way. I think I see much more of that. And I certainly am going to be helping out with much more of that in terms of being able to help people to grow.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. And we have a question from Jeff Ballou.
Hi, Lorna and Scarlett. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. In the beginning of the conversation, Lorna, you talked about how you're beginning to turn, well, you know, sort of like, I guess, I don't know what to describe it as, I guess, like almost like a battleship to get editorial to where you want it to be. What does the end product look like in your mind between yourself and Ingrid as bureau chief in terms of the ideal workflow for getting the stories, the balance, the diversity, the breadth and depth of the land and the world? Since you're in Washington, you're dealing with the world. What does that look like, and how do you make sure that the people you want to have at the table backing you up and supporting you in pitching and contributing, what does that look like? What does the end look like to you?
Yeah, look, it's been a long time coming. I'll be honest. I mean, it's not like that ever happened overnight, which is why I'm saying like the ship is starting to turn now. It's definitely not perfect. It is a work in progress, but it is also having some of the tough conversations that we have shied away from for way too long. And just as there's been a reckoning outside in terms of the outside world, there certainly has been one within journalism and how we start to cover certain stories. And, you know, we certainly have the support now, I would say more than ever. And I do feel confident to say that that will certainly continue and only grow stronger. And I think that it would be foolish to say that it wouldn't, only because we have to move and shift with what how society is moving and shifting. And we're not going backwards, right? And so everything in terms of having, I mean, like I said, I think last year alone was just an overflow of just enough's enough as far as to how we cover and how we continue to see Black people being shot dead in the street time and time again. There is, you know, I'll just tell you, it comes down to sometimes just, there can be almost a form of PTSD sometimes chasing after these stories and covering these stories over and over and over again. And as a mother of 2 boys, having to disconnect from work and then coming home and looking at them brings a whole lot into perspective. And sometimes it does come down to, yes, bringing that personal experience into the workplace and saying, we have to do this differently. We knew long time ago, before George Floyd, that all of these things just started to pile up. It's like another one. We're dealing with another one. Like this is, it's heavy. It's heavy. And there has to be, you know, you get to a point where sometimes you're tired of giving history lessons. And there has to just be, this is how we're going to start doing this, and here's why. There are conversations that I am having at my dinner table that majority of my colleagues are not having. And it's getting old and it's getting tired. And so you try, it's hard to, because you always have to wear your journalist hat, but there are certain occasions where that hat has to come off, because it's also compromising how we choose to cover these as we move forward, right? They need to hear from someone like me or Ingrid or Scarlett or Brandy, who was out covering George Floyd in Wisconsin. Say hi, Brandy. She's a CBSer.
Hello.
And being out in the field day after day, seeing people march. You didn't see this kind of enough's enough. Why did it take a man, dying on camera, literally dying on camera, 8 minutes of watching that? Why did it take that moment for folks to actually decide, okay, now's the time to start changing everything? So it is a process. And it's almost like a delicate dance to a certain degree in how you approach it, how you pitch things, and how it's always a dance for us, right? In terms of how we're able to present these stories. And there is a certain point where you're just like, it is what it is. And we need to just be straightforward in how we're covering this. Because it wasn't just George Floyd. I mean, you had Ahmaud Arbery, you had Breonna Taylor. It was like on. And this is just last year alone. We haven't even talked about this year.
And I think one thing is important too, Lorna, to point out and all that, seeing that on tape.
Yeah.
Because prior to that, I mean, yes, I do diversity work, but I'm a journalist first and foremost, always. And having to, and I've been at other news networks when Trayvon happened and Tamir Rice and all these other stories. And it's like Black people have to prove their victimhood. And it's just like, well, I mean, if he wasn't wearing that wouldn't have happened. If he just would have complied, that wouldn't have happened. So
we know that's not the case. Right.
Right. And so, like Lorna said, when you have children and all of that, like you are thinking about, how am I going to walk my kid through how to get home safely? I mean, my kids are little, but one day I'm going to have that conversation with my 5-year-old. Yeah. And I think George Floyd was a turning point, because that was the first time where that Black man didn't have to prove his victimhood like you saw it. Because I can't tell you how many times I heard, well, it was Trayvon's hoodie, or it was because Mike Brown did this, or like they would just walk through. And I'm not talking about CBS. I'm talking about when I was like in the field, in the control room as a journalist, being the only person in the color in the room. It's like, well, if he just would have did A, B, and C, it never would have happened. Mm-hmm. And it was almost a sense of like, a Black man, a Black person can never be a victim because he did it. The onus is on him to diffuse the situation. And I've had plenty of talks with cops, like why is the onus on people of color to diffuse the situation? You are the cop. You are supposed to be there de-escalating. And I think George Floyd, it was the first time where you saw minute by minute, there was no excuse. You couldn't say he had on a hoodie or he seemed threatening. Like, there was just no excuse. And I think that was one of the most frustrating things for me as a journalist, was having to basically talk people into why this Black person is a victim, because it was almost like, oh, well, they can't possibly be a victim because they kind of caused this. And that's just been frustrating. And, hats off to Brandy, who was on the ground for us this summer, who didn't get any sleep and who traveled. And it's just, and I'm sure she has even more gut-wrenching stories and reaction to that. But like I said, I think seeing that death on camera really did change the tide some.
Yeah.
Thank you both. I appreciate that. The one quick follow-up that spurs the mind is when we were talking about racial reckoning in our newsrooms, is to see us in some non-traditional roles in networks. It's not often you don't see us either in front or behind the cameras in the Pentagon beat or the State Department. And of course it's now you have people of color moving into the White House beat for you like Ed and others and Weijia. But how do you see that translate to the newsroom, moving us both in front and behind the camera into roles that traditionally have been occupied by white men?
Well, that's where people like me, Ingrid, or Scarlett come in. It really is recognizing that there are people out there. If you really want them, you'll put them in those roles. This is not rocket science. It really isn't. And I think that sometimes people make it harder than it needs to be, right? Perfect example is Weijia, who is now White House correspondent, and she worked with me at NewsPath. And I knew she was a star when I saw her at WCBS. I was like, who is that? She's fabulous. And when we hired her, I was like, awesome. And she made her way to the White House and she's been killing it. And I hope to find more Weijis. It really is expanding our vision into what someone is supposed to be like in whatever position. Like sometimes it's just putting someone there and people are realizing like, oh, actually this person really is great in what they do. It does mean, and I don't even want to say taking a chance, because like I said, there are qualified people out there. It's a matter of giving them that opportunity and letting them do what they can do. And I'm all for that. And I'm all for putting people of color and of different, ethnicities into these traditional roles. They made them traditional and they don't have to be anymore. And that's the beauty of it. I know that I'm in a position where I am blessed to be able to help shepherd those folks along. And when you can see that talent and be able to put somebody in a position and see them flourish, there's nothing more awesome than that, And so for me, yes, absolutely. If somebody comes in and I don't even like to say a good fit, because what does that even mean anymore, right? It's you're qualified, you can do the job. Now go off and do what you need to do. That's it. That's my job. Now you got to do your job, make sure you hold up to that. But I wouldn't put you in a position if I didn't think that you couldn't do it. And so I say that to say, absolutely, without question, I'm not here to fit into any kind of mold whatsoever. If you're qualified, you can do the job, and you're here to do the work, because that's key. Because I don't like to micromanage anybody. I am not here to babysit. If I hire you, then I know that you can do the job and you'll do it well.
Great.
So it really is up to, who we bring in to be able to do those jobs. But absolutely, I'm not here to fit into any kind of tradition. I don't fit the mold. myself. I don't. And I know that. And that's okay. So whatever you bring to the table, I embrace that as it, whatever it is. If it's different, you speak a different language, you know, Kate grew up in Kansas on a dairy farm. Like that to me is different. And sometimes we have to think differently in terms of what it means for diversity as well. Different socioeconomic backgrounds, all of that stuff comes into play. But I'm all about tearing down traditions because traditions tend to come with something else in mind. And we're all about trying to break those walls down. And like I said, really embracing just different opinions, different views, viewpoints. I think that only makes us stronger. It only makes us stronger.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We have Ryan Williams, Jenny Mack, and Bria Jackson.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I'm gonna do a comment, then a question. First, it's great to meet you, Lorna. Great to see Scarlett and Brandy join in this conversation. Welcome to DC. This has been quite an 18 months, I'm sure. And I want to start just by saying that we celebrate you because we visited the CBS News newsroom almost 2 years ago, Scarlett. And we have eyes, and it looks a little different. And we're thrilled about it. We're thrilled to have you. We're thrilled to have Ingrid. We're thrilled that CBS this morning kicked butt with the Black woman at the helm as EP for a dynamic interview everybody's talking about. This is not a press conference. You're among family. And because you're among family, my question is, what can we, as an association with 19 colleges and universities surrounded, with graduates, with mid-career, with professionals who are looking to connect, who need to hear your story, who need to see that we all know the power of seeing a bureau chief and a deputy bureau chief engage with them around issues around management, around how to run a newsroom where everybody's at home, all the varying things in terms of happen. How can we be a support to ensuring that this new CBS News that we've seen over the past couple years continues to thrive and flourish here in Washington, D.C.?
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. It is, I really appreciate you saying that. It's, like I said, it's been a long time coming. And I think that just in terms of let's staying connected, I would love for us to have, once everything starts to open up a little bit more, to have more of those opportunities when you guys came to the Bureau. From mid-career to, like I said, entry-level position, all those folks to be able to come into the Bureau and see how things operate. It's always good for people to look in the newsroom just to see, like, eventually this is where I will be. Not I could be, but eventually where I will be. So that is certainly something that I absolutely would love for us to continue to do down the line. And wherever you may need me, if I'm certainly available, Scarlett as well, I'm happy to talk to a group of folks and maybe figure out something down the line in terms of mentorship. I think, you know, it's interesting because people have said, does NABJ still need to exist? I'm like, more so than ever, more so than ever. There is a certain connection. And when I started at 48 Hours, I had joined NABJ. And this was, I'm giving my age away here, but you know, 2001. So when I went to my first Unity and being able to see all of the journalists connect, and this was when Unity was full on Unity as well. And that was a beautiful thing. But there's something about NABJ that to be able to connect with other Black journalists who were still trying to figure things out, And how do we get to that next step? And there is a beauty in that, being able to connect with other folks who are trying to do the same thing and trying to look out for each other, which is what we always have to continue to keep doing. That's one thing that I will never stop doing, ever. That is what I know, that I'm here for a reason. And a lot of that is to look out for my people, and will continue to do so, and help out wherever I can. I know that our voices are needed more so than ever. And it's important that representation is important, period, across the board. And so whatever I can do as well, please let me know. But I certainly would love to be able to continue to keep that connection going, and having more people be able to come and visit. Because there's something about seeing inside, where you see where all the magic happens, right? From the newsroom to the control room, and being able to just see how all of it's put together. And there is a beauty in that. And so I absolutely welcome you guys. Once we're able to open up again, we'll certainly do that.
I'm more than happy to have y'all back and buy dinner. That was fun.
It was.
Yeah, we will definitely work on that. Janae?
Thank you. Just a quick question. How do you find story ideas?
So that takes time. I always tell people when they're starting out to continue to pitch until something sticks, right? Because you're not going to know off, and it always depends on the show too. So know your audience. Certainly know, like the morning show folks are going to look for something that's a little bit fluffier. The evening news is certainly going to look for something that's a little bit more hard news. That is more hard news. Sometimes they'll do fluffy, and that's usually the end piece. But typically, evening news is going to want something that's more hard news. So I say know your audience, know the show, and pitch until somebody finally says yes. It takes some time. You got to get into a decent rhythm in terms of, certain senior producers or executive producers may like certain stories on this. We had one executive producer who loved the stories on the Royals, right? Couldn't get enough of the Royals. So you gave her all the stories on the Royals. You had one, if they're doing a series on, say, education, try to find something that's out of the box, not just the norm. I always try to tell people, if that's something we've already done, then let's try and think out of the box as far as to what else we could be doing. But it takes a little time to put the feelers out until someone finally says yes. And then you'll start to get an understanding of, what they like. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Jenny and Bria. We have a final question from you. And I'm going to see if I can squeeze this one in from Cassie. Can you talk more about your goals for the digital side? And how do you collab with the broadcast side?
So the digital side has been booming, as you can imagine, especially streaming, given that we've been in a pandemic and everybody's been at home. We have certainly been doing our due diligence to connect broadcast and digital together as much as possible. We have digital reporters who a lot of times they'll do a lot of original reporting. So they'll post something or publish something on the website on a story that they've done. We have, I would say at least 10 digital reporters, some that are at the White House, some who are on the Hill. They all try to file something at least once a week. But then we do have like a whole digital operation in and of itself that is just it's a separate entity from broadcast. It's a huge machine though. And in terms of being able to publish things online, certainly the streaming with CBSN, which has been huge. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to watch CBSN, but it is our 24/7 online streaming service, and it's nothing but news. We do have a lot of our own correspondents. They have their own correspondents, but we certainly have the network correspondents that will, do hits and things like that for them around the clock. So it is certainly been very successful, and I think it can only get better.
And Bria, do you want to go ahead and ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your time. My question kind of goes off of what Jeff was saying, but also with what Lorna, you mentioned earlier when it comes to the ship turning. And it seems like that's happening with a lot of organizations other than CBS. And I guess, how do you feel, what do you feel CBS is doing well, better there than other organizations when it comes to addressing diversity? What do you think other organizations are doing better than CBS? And then how do you feel CBS is going to keep the momentum moving forward? Because sometimes these big events happen, you see changes, and then it goes right back to how it was before. And so I guess there may be a couple of questions in that, but mainly, what do you think CBS is doing better than other organizations when it comes to these diversity initiatives? Where can CBS improve? And then how can they keep that momentum moving forward so that it doesn't go back to how things were before?
Sure. I think, look, we can start with George Cheeks, who is a diverse, president of Viacom CBS, who has come in here and done tremendous things in terms of diversity initiatives right off the bat, from news to entertainment, where it had been pretty stagnant for some time at CBS. I think CBS is probably no different than a lot of the other networks, not just networks. I would say news in general, because you can talk about some of, Washington Post, New York Times, we're all in the same boat, right? And so I think once George got here, he really wanted to walk the walk, and he has been. He has been taking action, and you see it. It's visible, because you can say you want to make all the changes, but then you look around and things are still the same. Nothing's changed. And so I think seeing the changes certainly speak to how we are going in a different direction, in a positive direction, I think, as CBS, Viacom CBS as a whole. And I think it's encouraging to see that we are taking diversity serious, that we are taking, changing the culture different as well. And you see some of the, things that you've seen in the news with Viacom CBS. I'm sure you guys can Google it, but there have been some changes, and big changes, necessary changes. And I think it's really just promoting a sense of culture that is inclusive, that everyone feels like they belong, and that there isn't a sense of feeling isolated, and that nothing's going to change. So let me put my head down and do my due diligence. I think that there's a difference now. I can't speak to what the other networks are doing, in terms of diversity. I would say that I think everybody kind of had to take a step back and realize, like, we do need to make some changes here. And what is that going to look like? Because we can't just put out statements anymore without action. And I do think that that's starting, that is happening more and more now, which I can say, honestly, in my almost 20 years of being at CBS, it never happened. We've been having these conversations for too long. And there are folks that came before me who've been having these conversations for too long. But to actually see the change happen is a beautiful thing. And I do feel like we are moving it, and we'll continue to move in that direction.
Thank you so much. And I missed this question earlier. A member asked, can you give some practical advice for new journalists who see their non-BIPOC colleagues getting all the attention from management, that is getting better assignments, easier kudos, etc.?
Well, I will say this, try to have informational meetings if you can, separately from folks. Try to set those up. Sometimes those are helpful, and go in there with a goal in mind as far as to what the takeaway is going to be, right? Certainly have the first informational meeting to introduce yourself, because sometimes you can be the only person of color in the room and they still don't notice you. And so it does take a moment to send an email and to say, hey, make sure you do your research first, know the person's background in terms of their career. Always say that's, you can go in there and have something to talk about. I'm not saying to go in there and you know, fluff anyone's head up, but certainly go in there knowing who you're talking to and what their background is about. And just let them know who you are, what you're looking for down the line, talk about your goals down the line. And I think people really appreciate that. You'd be surprised. You'd be very surprised. I work, you know, tell them I work in the newsroom. This is what I've been doing for over a year, but this is what I'm looking at down the line, a year or two from now. You know, is there a chance for me to grow in this area? Who do you suggest that I can speak to? And can I follow up with you in about a month or so? Check in with you every so often. Those
Great.
Informational meetings, you'd be very surprised. People do appreciate reaching out. So I say start with that.
Great.